everyone. We are continuing our limud of Sefer Yechezkel. We are in Perek Daled. Now, Perek Daled is really the middle of a nevuah. And if you recall, Yechezkel was actually told at this point in Bavel to go into his house, remain silent, and not say a word. And this silence is in itself communicating a message and a teichacha to the Jewish people, as if to tell them, you're so far away from Hashem that it's not even worthwhile to talk to you. And therefore my silence is actually a very eloquent teichacha about how far gone you are. And therefore, paradoxically, the silence itself might be the hisayrus to tshuva. So we now have to picture the Navi, that the Navi is in a position where he remains silent. So now in Perek Daled we have a very interesting thing. Although the Navi remains silent, he is commanded to engage in certain activities, and some of them will almost be like a child playing with toy soldiers, so that people should see what is actually going on. Now again, some learn this is a dream that he has, and if that's the case, nobody is really exposed to it other than we who are reading this. But the pashtus of the psukim is, he is actually commanded to act certain things out, so that even when he is not teaching us by words, he's teaching us by actions. And there are a number of actions that he is commanded to do. Now remember, this is during his period of silence. So Perek Daled is the middle of a nevuah. V'yata ben Adam, pasuk aleph, kach lecha levena, take a brick, v'nasata isa lefanecha, put the brick in front of you. V'chakaisa aleha ir es Yerushalayim, and engrave on the brick kind of the skyline of Yerushalayim, kind of a picture, an image of Yerushalayim. So that's the brick. Beis, v'nasata aleha matzar. Again, it's hard for us to fully understand this, but this is like a child playing lahavdil. You have this brick which is Yerushalayim, and make a siege against the city. And he says, Uvanisa ala doyek, build against it a doyek. A doyek is like a tower which allows you to climb over the wall. V'shafachta ala sailala, and pour dirt and stones to lift the ground level so you could climb over the wall. In other words, simulate what an invading army does. V'nasata ala machanais, you should have armies around the city. V'sim alaha karim saviv, and there should be battering rams that knock down a wall. Now, it's not clear exactly what is the mental picture here. Is it that the brick has an engraving of the city, and Yechezkel quite literally is like playing soldiers, he makes an army around the city? Or maybe the simplest shot might be that this is part of his drawing, that when you engrave the city, engrave in the brick the dayak, the tower, the battering ram, the cellular. So it's not that Yechezkel is surrounding the brick with these different things, but rather that is part of the engraving of the brick. V'yata, pasuk gimel, and you should do another thing after that. Kach lecha machvas barzel. Take an iron tray, like a flat iron tray. V'nasata osa kir barzel beincha uvein ha'ir. You're facing the brick, but put this tray as an iron wall, an iron curtain, between you and the city. V'hachinaisa es panecha ela, and then you should turn in the direction of the city. V'haisa b'matzor, and the city is under siege. V'tzarta alaha, and you are besieging the city. Oisi lebeis Yisrael, this will be a sign for the Jewish people. Again, the idea would be that on one hand, the Navi is representing Hashem. Hashem is sieging the city. On the other hand, he put an iron wall, mechitza shel barzel, between himself and Am Yisrael, that their tefillos are not going to help at the moment of the Chorban. The Gezerah has to be carried out. So Yechezkel is acting out at a time when he does not talk. He's acting out the siege of Yerushalayim and the Chorban of the Beis HaMikdash. So that is symbolic act number one, the engraving of the city on the brick and the mechitza shel barzel. Pasuk Dalet, V'yata shechav al tzitcha hasmali, you should lie on the ground on your left side. V'samta es avon beis Yisrael alav, and on that left side you should place the sins of the house of Israel. Mispar hayamim asher tishkav alav, for the number of days that you are lying down. Tisa es avonam, you are carrying their sin. Let me read the next pasuk. V'ani nasati l'cha shnei avonam lemispar yamim, and I have given you the years of their sin. Shalosh meos v'tishim yom, 390 days. V'nasasa avayin beis Yisrael, and you will carry the sin of Beis Yisrael for 390 days. I'll come back to this. V'chilisa es ela, and when you finish the 390 days, v'shachavta al tzidcha hayamani shenis, you should then recline, lean on your right side. V'nasasa es avayin beis Yehuda arboim yaim, you should bear the sin of the house of Yehuda for 40 days. Yaim lashana, 1 day per year. Yaim lashana, 1 day per year. Nasativ lach, I have given this burden to you. So, this is a little difficult. Let's start with the simple thing. There's a reference here to Beis Yisrael and Beis Yehuda. Beis Yisrael refers to the 10 tribes that were already exiled a number of years before the Golus of even Yehoiachin, around 100 years or more. And they're called Beis Yisrael because their Malchus in Shemrain was called the Malchus Yisrael. The Beis Yehuda are the tribes of Yehuda, Binyamin, and Kohanim and Leviim that are still in Eretz Yisrael, although Yechezkel's in Bavel, but there is a group in Eretz Yisrael. The Beis HaMikdash has not been destroyed yet. Now, Rashi makes a cheshbon. We don't have time to fully go through this at this point. But at the time of this nevuah, the Jewish people have already been in Eretz Yisrael. Well, we know that Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash 440 years after they came to Eretz Yisrael. And the Bayis Rishon stood 410 years. So from the time of the entry of Yehoshua until the Chorban Beis HaMikdash is 850 years. This is a few years before that. So it's around 845 years or so. Of those 845 years, there were 390 years which were the sinful years of Malchus Yisrael. Now that started from Yehoshua, even before there was a separate Malchus. So when it says these were sinful years of Malchus Yisrael, it doesn't only mean Malchus Yisrael, but since they were the Rov, so whenever they were part of us, we consider them to be the culprits, but all of us were the culprits. So of the 845 years, there were 390 years of sin together with Malchus Yisrael. And then, from the time of the exile of Malchus Yisrael until this point, all you had is Malchus Yehuda. There's another 40. Rashi goes through the cheshbon. It's a complicated issue. As a result, the Chorban Beis HaMikdash is an einish from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the 390 plus the 40, 430 years of Chet. Now that's interesting because that's only around half the time, meaning the Yidden are there around 845 years. Of that, it's only 430 that are sinful years. That's interesting. You wouldn't always get that impression. There were many years of righteousness. But nevertheless, there are a total of 390 in which all of the Jewish people were involved in sin, and then 40 in which only Beis Yehuda is involved in sin. And based on the idea that Yechezkel is lying down on the left as the Asurin and Kapara for the 390, and then lying down on his right as a Kapara for the 40. The notion is, now this is a complicated, controversial idea, either this is symbolic, so the Jewish people should see how much of a burden their Averos created in the world, or on some level, Yechezkel's suffering is the suffering of a tzaddik that ameliorates the sin. Again, it's not mechaper legamri because there's going to be a churban, but it takes away some of the midas hadin. So that is the meaning of the symbolic lying down. What does it mean actually? Does it mean the whole day he was on the ground like this? That would be superhuman, but everything is possible. Or does it just mean when he's awake he could go around, but at night when he went to sleep, he had to remain. This is also very hard. He had to literally tie himself down to be on his left for more than a year, and then to be on his right. But it could be that this was not for 24 hours, this was only for the zman of sleeping. Now, the pasuk then combines the brick and the sleeping in this way. El matzor Yerushalayim tachin panecha. Whichever way you are lying down, you should place the brick of Jerusalem opposite your face. So when you are sleeping on the left, you put it to the left of yourself. When you're sleeping on the right, you put it to the right of yourself. Uzorecha chasufa. Your arm should be rolled up. Your sleeve should be rolled up like an enemy that is fighting, to signify to the people who watch you that God is fighting, so to speak, on the part of the enemy. I have placed chains upon you. This may be literal or figurative. You're not allowed to change sides till you finish all of the days of your suffering. So that's symbolic act number 2. Symbolic act number 1 is the engraving of Jerusalem on the brick. Symbolic act number 2 is the shechiva for 390 and then 40. Then we have symbolic act number 3, the making of special bread. Now remember, Yechezkel is silent throughout this period. He does not talk. V'ata, kach lecha chitim usa'orim. Take wheat and barley. Upul. Pul is a type of bean. Adashim, lentils. Daichan. Daichan what we would call buckwheat. Kusmim. Kusmin could be spelt. Again, although some say in Tanakh, kusmin is actually buckwheat as well. V'nasata eisam b'chliacha. Take all of these different grains in one vessel. V'yasisa l'cha eisam l'cha l'lachem. And make it bread. Mispar hayamim asher tashachiv al sitcha. For the number of days that you will be lying down, you will eat this bread. Again, depending on what this meant, if he has to lie down for 24 hours, which is really hard to imagine, then the bread would be pre-made and someone would bring it to him. If we say that during the day he could make it and walk around, then at night when he would eat, he would lie down and eat the bread. And this would be for 390 days. Now, the Mefarshim understand that this would also be for the 40 days. You'll see why. It mentions the 390, but then it would also be for the 40. Now, those of you that frequent diet stores or health food stores may know that there's actually a product on the market. It has a hechsher that's called Ezekiel bread. And it's actually a sprouted bread that has all of these different ingredients, buckwheat and spelt and wheat and barley and beans. And it's supposed to follow the recipe of Yechezkel. And it is marketed as a healthy bread. A lot of vitamins, a lot of minerals, low in calories, low in fat. But in this context, you actually see that Ezekiel bread was considered to be a very inferior bread, mixed with all sorts of different things that normally don't go together. It was coarse, it was unrefined. A lot of the things that we like today in terms of health, like unrefined, were considered to be inferior, the bread of the poor. And Yechezkel is eating this poor man's bread, this kind of mixture of a million different things, as a sign to the Jewish people that when they go into exile, they will not be able to have regular food. They're going to have to scrounge up whatever leftovers they can find and make a cholent of a bread. So it's interesting that in the context of the pasuk, the Ezekiel bread is a sign of poverty and deprivation rather than health. So you will eat this poor bread and you will drink a limited amount of water. You will eat a weight of this bread, 20 shekel. This is a weight per day. That's very little bread. And you will eat it every 24 hours, meaning you'll eat this inferior bread in very small amounts. Umayim b'masurit tishta. And you will drink water in a small measure. Shishis hahin meyes ades tishta. Only a sixth of a hin in 24 hours. Now, a sixth of a hin equals 2 lug. Now, 2 lug, well, let's put it this way, is a revius, which is 4 ounces, is a fourth of a lug. So 2 lug is 8 revius, 8 revius is 32 ounces of water. So in a 24-hour period, you will drink 32 ounces of water, plus a small amount of this bread, to kind of experience in your life the famine conditions of the Yidden in the Babylonian attack. There is a concept here that I cannot fully articulate, that Yechezkel has to live through the Galus. And in that way, he makes it a little easier for the rest of the Jewish people. Now, there is a kasha, because the Chayra, it only says he does this for the 390 days. The Chayra, he should also do it for the 40 days. Many Meforshim say that is included. Some say not. And then it continues with instructions about the bread. V'ugas sa'irim teichlena. You should eat it like barley bread. Now, what does that even mean? I mean, there's barley in it, but there's also wheat and buckwheat and spelt and beans. So Rashi says, and again, I'm not familiar with this, that apparently when you made a barley dough, you didn't really smooth it. It was lumpy and it didn't look very nice. So you should knead it in a very primitive way, as if you were in a rush. And here it says, V'hi b'gelolei tseisa adam tu'ugena li'eineim. In front of the Jewish people, you should knead the dough with human excrement. Now, this is quite shocking. And if you read the pasuk literally, he is commanded to knead the dough with human excrement. Now, that would be virtually unbearable, but a Navi would do whatever a Navi does. But it would be an extremely powerful visual statement of the devastation of the famine. But what's interesting is, none of the Meforshim take it literally. I guess this just would have been too unbelievable. Baruch Hashem. And what they say is, kneading it with the human excrement does not mean that the human excrement goes into the dough, but rather, the human excrement should be dried up and used as the coal upon which the bread is baked. Now that's still disgusting, but it's the coal. Let's bake the bread on top of the human excrement that's dried out and functions as a coal. Now, it's interesting that Yechezkel protested. Yechezkel said, this is too much for me. It's a rare example of a Navi actually saying to Hashem, I can't do it. But before then, Pasuk Yud Gimel says, Vayemer Hashem, Kacha yechlu b'nei Yisrael es lachmim tamei. This is how the Jewish people will eat this impure bread. Impure meaning not treif, but impure meaning repulsive. This is how they will eat. They will be in such a famine. And here Yechezkel, among the nations that I will send them. But Yechezkel writes, V'yoimar, and I said at the time, Aha Hashem Elokim, alas God, I can't do this. Hine nafshi lo mitum, I have never contaminated my soul with impure food. Nevelo treifa lo yachalti minirai b'arata. I never violated the laws of kashrus. I never ate nevela, which is an animal not shechted. Treifa is an animal that's shechted, but it has some abnormality or defect of the internal organs. I have not eaten nevelu treifa minurai arata. I've guarded my mouth. My mouth is pure. There has never been something bad coming into my mouth. V'lo ba b'pi basar pigel. And any improper meat has never come into my mouth. Now, technically, pigel does have a technical definition. It's not clear that it means it here. In the Beis HaMikdash, if a korban was brought with a wrong intention to eat it, not in its proper time, then the korban is forbidden to be eaten, and it's called pigel. You're chayiv kares. Yechezkel might mean I've never eaten pigel, but pigel in a more general sense is anything that's improper. So essentially, he's begging God, God, please don't put me through this. Now, here's the thing: if you understood that Hashem was really saying, knead the bread with human excrement, I can understand the pathos in which he's begging Hashem. Anything but that. I mean, the hemshech of the pasuk is very, very logical. If Hashem's command was simply bake it over dried human excrement, it's not clear that why that would elicit the same reaction. But be it as it may, Yechezkel said, I can't do it. Of course, didn't Hashem know that? Hashem modifies his demand at this point. V'yomer Elai. And Hashem said to me, Re'ei nasati lecha es tzviyei habakar. You can use animal dung. Tachas gilulei ha'adam. So again, like one pshat, even that, mix it into the dough. It's not clear why he would be happy with that, but it's not human excrement. Like the other pshat, it was simply used for coals. And here it says, and you can bake your bread on top of them. So here for sure, it's coals. So really, if you learn that Hashem's first command was knead the dough with human, Hashem is giving him two concessions. Animal instead of human, and coals, it'll be coals instead of being in the dough itself. So then I understand. But most Meforshim learned that even when it was human, it was only going to be coals, and the change to the animal is simply to make it coals. To make it animal instead of human. But what is the meaning of the symbolic gesture? Vayomer Elai, Ben Adam, Hineni Shaver Matelechem B'Yerushalayim. I will break the staff of bread. There'll be starvation. Achlu Lechem B'Mishkal. They'll have to weigh their bread like in a concentration camp. Ubidaiga. They will be worried. Will they have enough bread? Umayim B'Masura. And they will drink their water in little measurements. Uvishimamon Yishtu. And they will drink in desolation and confusion. Laman Yachsru Lechem B'Mayim. Because by not having food and water, v'nashamu ish v'yochiv, they will feel desolate and empty, v'namaku b'yavonam, and they will be destroyed and wiped away through their sin. So these are the three symbolic acts of Yechezkel. Number one, the brick of Yerushalayim that's engraved on the brick. Number two, the shechiva, for 390 and 40, 390 on the left and 40 on the right. And number three, the baking and making of the Yechezkel bread and the drinking of the water in small quantities, so he experiences the famine. Now these were public acts. These are acts that he's doing in front of people. He's not talking, he's mute, but through his actions, he's communicating how serious the matzav is.